Um, there we are. So welcome everybody to the launch of the Student Journal of Vegan Sociology, Volume 1. Hopefully many of them. My name is Linda Corrin-Bocas. I'm the Editor-in-Chief appointed for the journal. And with us are various other members of the editorial team, and also some of the faculty advisors that guided us along the way. We're incredibly proud to present this today and to launch it on World Vegan Day as well. And really, really pleased that you could join us. So just to let you know what's happening, the plan for the day is, if my screen will actually change, there we are. I'm kind of doing the welcoming and opening remarks just now. I'll then hand over to Jennifer Schauer, who will give you an introduction to the journal itself. She's the chair of the Faculty Advisory Board for the journal. We then have presentations of 5 of the 6 papers today. A couple are live, a couple are pre-recorded. And Sarah May Lindsay, my assistant editor, she's wonderful, will introduce those, and then we'll do a few bits of thanks and whatnot. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. We expect it to last no more than an hour with any luck. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing for now, and let's pass over to Jennifer to welcome you all to the launch of our journal. Jennifer.
Thank you, Linda. So welcome everyone, the authors who we're so grateful for, the editorial collective, which is a total of 10 students: Linda, Sarah May, Maria, Rochelle, Jillian, Renelle, Nicole, Sarah, Daria, and Catherine. We're so grateful for all of your work and all of the commitment you put into this project and this endeavor, to our wonderful faculty who is so supportive, Corey, Zoe, Matthew, Jessica, and Catherine. We extend our gratitude for this space for students to pave the way in brave and courageous efforts toward non-human animal liberation, and what that means on the ground and theoretical in all of these spaces that animals exist within our society, which are multitudinal. And just reminding ourselves over and over again, we are a space of resistance. We are a space of liberation and conversation and discourse, and going against the heteronormative structures and systems that are in place is often challenging and uncomfortable. So we really hope we can find cohesiveness in this collective, as well as really an established core of people to unify in solidarity under this cause. And remember that we are in not only a space of scientific ration and reason, but we are in a space of heart and feeling and empathy for the non-human species that we coexist with in this world. And that's just really a space that is not normative as well in our structures in our society, like just this tending to feelings and the more feminine aspects and the more feminine archetypes that we see. And so we really invite so much variety and so much inclusion in this space. And we see that in the different countries represented in our collective, which is Canada, the UK, Scotland, US, Australia, Romania, and we just open it up to other nations that are especially underprivileged and not always a part of the conversation on non-human animals, so we can draw on their knowledge, institutional knowledge, as well as embodied and lived experience. So, you know, I guess I wanted to say, other than what I said in my proclamation, is that we are creatresses, we are creators of our own destiny, and we can move mountains. And I just want to put that charge out there. And that's what this is. This is a project, this is an endeavor in shaping and reshaping what we know to be true. which extends beyond the mind and the intellect into the body. And so we honor today and always in our spaces the non-human animals, the non-human species. And we remember that we are interwoven into their tapestries of being as they are interwoven into our tapestries of being. And there is really no separation. And so let's continue to come back to this space of unity, solidarity, and oneness. And let's create. And I will end with the way I ended in my proclamation, which is a Sanskrit chant, which holds life as sacred and does not distinguish between humans and animals. Loka samosta sukino bhovantu. May all beings everywhere find freedom, peace, and happiness. And may my thoughts, words, and actions in each and every way contribute to that freedom, peace, and happiness of all beings everywhere. Thank you so much for being here, to our audience, to our authors, to the faculty, in mind, body, and spirit. And I will hand it over now to Sarah Mae Lindsay, who will introduce our authors.
Thank you. Beautiful introduction by some beautiful souls. I met so many on this journey already, and I feel very grateful. I'm very privileged and lucky to be able to introduce the authors whose work we're highlighting in this pivotal, monumental journal, first of its kind. And I can't really say enough. I think that of how proud I am of everyone, and that the work that these students in particular has put forth is it will move you. I know it has moved me. It's almost hard to put into words. It's excellent. And so we're going to start, and I do apologize. I have a little bit of an unstable connection today. I'll have to turn off my screen now and again, but hopefully you can hear me right now. And I really want to introduce Natalia. Natalia, I'm going to try. Natalia, that's close, has written a beautiful piece called In the Name of Cows' Rights, Sacred Cow Mothers and Ethno-Nationalism in India. And she's going to take us through her paper right now. So take it away, Natalia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah Mae. And before I start, I just want to really thank the team and all the reviewers for, I guess, letting me be part of this process. This was the first paper that I've ever submitted, and just having feedback and support the whole way along the process was really beautiful, and a very nice first introduction into, I guess, academic writing as well. Yeah, I'll share my screen if that is possible. I've got just a few slides. I'll try and keep it brief because I know there's quite a few people to speak. Hopefully that works.
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, and is that fine?
That's excellent.
Great. Okay. Yeah, as Sarah Mae just said, I'm going to speak about my paper, which is In the Name of Cows' Rights, Sacred Cow Mothers and Ethno-Nationalism in India. And I'll give you a bit about the background and my motivation for writing this paper, because I'm by no means an expert in this topic, and also then take you through the background and a bit of the theoretical approach. And I probably won't go so much into the analysis due to time, but that's all in the paper as well. And also I'm currently on a joint PhD program. I'm in my first year between the University of Adelaide and University of Nottingham. But I wrote this paper as part of my master's. So yeah, just to provide a bit of the background and interest, I was really fortunate to receive a scholarship to go and spend some time at the Indian Institute of Technology in India, in Mumbai, in 2018. And while I was there, I just found the prevalence of cows in everyday lives really striking. There's a couple of pictures that I took myself of just the campus where there's a cow in the main quad, and also down by the lake. And everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people there told me cows in India are sacred. And I remember I thought, this is it's beautiful, this is so nice, like what a wonderful thing. And then sort of spending more time looking at the real material realities of cows, sometimes just on very crowded streets with lots of air pollution and traffic, and sometimes eating sort of like rubbish on the side of the road, I began to question really like how far this sacrality goes in terms of the welfare of bovines in this context. And then when I got back to, did my master's in Berlin and did a really wonderful module with Professor Christina Bauhart at the Humboldt University on feminist political ecology and ecofeminism. And this really inspired me to use this theoretical framework to then look at this phenomenon. So yeah, a bit more about the background. So there's really a long tradition of cow protectionism and a deep-rooted ethic of the sacred cow in India. And additionally, the cattle in India are very much intertwined with the material realities of many different groups. So they are meta commodities and livelihoods for many Muslims and Dalits who are involved or work in the beef and tanning industries. They're also significant for women's work in the feeding, milking, and nurturing of sick cows. There's also a long established Hindu food hierarchy in India where vegetarianism is sort of at the top, where you then have like meat eating and non-beef underneath, and then the lowest form in this hierarchy is beef eating. And this has led to also the stigmatization of beef in social life. And what has happened more recently, and especially since the BJP with Prime Minister Modi's party came to power in 2014, is the politicization of bovines and the mobilization also of bovines in political discourse. There's a very long tradition of the cow protection movement, which I also talk about in my paper, but it's really, my argument is that it's since 2014 that there has been more of the use and mobilization of the sacred cow discourse. And at the same time, this has led to religious and caste-based discrimination. So what I look at in this paper is I sort of pose the question, what role do bovines play in the co-construction of social difference in India? And then drawing on the feminist political ecology framework that I'd been studying at the time, I tried to fuse both post-structuralist approaches which look at discursive processes with post-humanist approaches which look more at material processes, and look at how these, in the words of Karen Brad, interact. So look at how matters of interactions of matter and discourse, while also retaining an explanation of power and difference through an intersectional analysis. I won't go so much into detail now because of time, but I just wanted to highlight the intersectional analysis that I did draws a lot on some really brilliant scholars such as Yamini Narayanan, who works a lot on gender and human-animal relations, also in urban spaces in India. And I went through looking at how this sacred, or the discourse of the sacred cow, was being used in the political space, but underneath this, what were the material realities and lived experiences of both human and non-human groups, such as women, cows, Muslims, and Dalits. And I also then looked at how forms of resistance were trying to, I guess, like fight back against certain forms of oppression, and were expressions of agency of these oppressed groups. And in the end, I sort of argue that we need to look at this through a post-humanist intersectional lens, because some of these forms of resistance also are contributing to a further embedding of the human-animal divide. And I go into this quite a lot more in the paper. Yeah, so just, I don't want to go too far over in terms of time. So taking this feminist post-humanist approach, I aim to look at the role that bovines play in the co-construction of social difference in India, and one of my aims is to highlight forms of discrimination and violence that undermine animal advocacy and social justice. And this intersectional analysis revealed that the symbolic prophecies of the sacred cow, or despite the symbolic prophecies of the sacred cow, there is a material oppression of various minority groups. And in the sort of conclusion to the paper, in answer to the question, I argue that rather than a unitary symbol, cow mothers provide a divisive and hierarchical landscape for India's ethno-nationalist project, all in the name of cows' rights. Yeah, thank you so much, and I really look forward to hearing about the other papers.
Thank you, Natalia. That was a great summation of a really terrific paper, and everyone should go and follow up on those excellent points that she has raised, and really important conversation to have. So we're going to move next. Of course, I think Linda put in the chat, if you have questions, please put it in the chat and we can address them at the end. We're going to have a little Q&A session. The collective, the authors, whoever you want to hear from. My amazing tech guru who does everything, Linda, has just put up a presentation that has been pre-recorded by Ruth Griggs.
Hi,
and in the paper,
so
it is Queering Veganism, Prospects for a New Utopia. So go ahead and thanks so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth. I'm really sorry that I can't be here today for the presentation. But yeah, I've just sent in this recording. So I'm going to talk about queering veganism and prospects for a new utopia, which is my paper in the upcoming journal. So I want to discuss the queer potential of veganism and how veganism can actually be read as a queer practice. And by this I mean not so much queerness as in a sexual identity, but rather an anti-normative practice. In other words, a practice that challenges any assumed natural order of things. So for example, a vegan diet disrupts the idea of meat consumption being a normal and dominant discourse. So queerness in that sense is a radical force, and in that way veganism is also an act of queerness. And I want to explore in particular how this understanding of queerness actually enables us to configure veganism as a queer utopia. So to begin, I just want to clarify what is meant by a queer utopia, and this is a term coined by Jose Munoz, who writes about queer utopias as spaces that step outside of hegemonic social orders and enable new forms of being, new relationships, alternative realities, and new existences. So he writes that queerness and queer utopias are a path and a movement to a greater openness to the world. And by this he refers to the multiple possibilities that arise when our understandings of existence, identity, time, food, etc. are no longer defined by the present social order and actually challenge its restrictiveness. So in this sense, queerness promises a utopian future. In this sense that I argue queerness is veganism itself is a queer utopia. So like queerness, veganism also has the ability to produce new potentialities and also suggests a future beyond the doctrines of the present, most notably beyond meat-eating culture, so beyond anthropocentrism and speciesism, anthropocentrism being the hierarchy of humans and non-human animals. And I want to argue that veganism is a queer utopia in three specific ways. So number one, it queers the present moment. Number two, it has the ability to imagine and enact alternative futures. And number three, it promises multiple forms of belonging. So to begin, my paper looks at how veganism queers the present moment and what this means. So in order for veganism to disrupt hegemonic social orders, it has to make the present strange and uncanny to itself. In other words, it has to historicize the present. It has to emphasize that the social order we live in is actually a contingent product of history and emphasize its shifting and conditional nature, and in so doing expose its authority, disturb its authority and its set regimes. Most notably, veganism does this through unveiling the contingency of anthropocentric values. So through individual acts of veganism, it's demonstrated that there are alternatives to meat eating culture, and there are practices that exist beyond this fixed narrative. And it actually demonstrates that meat eating norms, such as the necessity of meat for a healthy diet, are actually, in fact, themselves social constructions. So in order to explain this point, it's often helpful to step away from the theory and look at a real life, everyday example. So I want to just focus for a second on the position of the vegan at the dinner table. So if we understand the traditional family meal as a space that tends to reinforce meat eating, so it's often centered around a meat-based dish. For example, if you're British, there's a Sunday dinner which is centered around a meat-based food in the middle. So the vegan's refusal in these spaces often makes those around the dinner table very uncomfortable, because it forces them to evaluate the meat they're consuming, something they normally take for granted, and suddenly a natural process is called into question simply by the vegan's presence. People start to think of the meat as an animal, and the vegan can expose subjectivities that are usually hidden at these times. So the vegan therefore challenges traditional dietary practices in this space and refuses the anthropocentrism that's embedded in this space itself. And it is within this process that veganism makes a presence strange to itself, and the contingency of meat consumption is exposed. So here veganism comes to function as an alternative present, an alternative reality, a new way of relating to food, a new way of relating to non-human animals. And in this sense, it actually acts itself as a utopia at the dinner table, but it also exposes a glimpse of a utopian future beyond meat eating, which leads us to the second point, which is how veganism is a queer utopia because of its promise of radical alternative futures, and it has the ability to conceptualize as a future beyond what we are in the present. So here it's useful to focus specifically on a strand of veganism called total liberation veganism, which is focused on dismantling intersecting oppressions of all life, so not just non-human animal exploitation, but also those who marginalized people who face exploitation and oppressions in society. So importantly, rather than incorporating veganism into the current social order, total liberation veganism wants to completely reconstruct the social order that we have, and actually champions a radical abolition of capitalism, which it argues is inseparable from human and non-human animal exploitation. So it envisions the destruction of, and most importantly, the reconstruction of society, as Best explains on this quote. The vegan and animal standpoints bear the seeds of a profound paradigm shift, turning away from dominatory cultures towards a new ethic and culture of complementarity, interconnectedness, and reverence for all life. This quote itself highlights the utopian feel embedded within veganism, and we can see that veganism reconstructs our understandings of progress and the future. So the final way in which veganism is a queer utopia is through its promise of multiple forms of belonging. So for Munoz, a queer utopia is a place that has broad collectivity, and there's subjects that thrive and exist through difference, and it's the difference and diversity that makes these places so utopian. Veganism takes this one step further and celebrates various forms of existence. From cows to pigeons to whales, it recognises new forms of subjectivities and new understandings of agency. And in adding non-human animals to the image of the utopia, veganism queers the very idea of belonging and creates radical forms of community and collectivity that are more than human. To end, I'd just like to draw attention to vegan sanctuaries, which I argue exist as queer utopias, vegan queer utopias, and demonstrate this through one in particular called Vine, which is a queer-run vegan sanctuary in the States. And it's noticeably queer and utopian in its actions. It encourages the non-human animals to cultivate autonomy, friendships, and a sexual agency beyond what they would have otherwise been confined to when they were just being exploited for farming, etc. So there's limited human intervention and a lack of human authority regarding the spaces, the routines of the animals, etc. And in this way, Vine builds a community between the animals, but also between the animals and those who care for the animals, the humans involved in their care. And all the different subjectivities exist and thrive together. And it's therefore a great example of a queer utopia, because there's multiple forms of belonging that are happening in this space. So to conclude, I just want to summarise the 3 ways in which veganism acts as a queer utopia. So you have that queer is the present moment. It disrupts dominant social discourses, most importantly anthropocentrism. Secondly, it envisions an alternative future, one beyond the injustices wound up within capitalism, be these non-human animal exploitations or human oppressions as well. And finally, it champions a future of new collectivities and communities, celebrating multiple forms of belonging and radical ideas of subjectivity. Thank you so much for listening, and if anyone wants to further discussion or have any more questions, these are my email addresses and I would be very keen to keep this conversation going. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your attention there to Ruth's presentation. I really love the bonus of doing these events online, that if individuals can't be present at that very time, they can still send their whole presentation into us and we can enjoy it. And I think that's really, really a wonderful and valuable part of doing things this way, as Phoebe seems to agree. So I want to mention that Daniel A. Harrison is not going to be present with us today, but really hold a space for him. His work is the 3rd article in our journal, and it's entitled Sabotaging the Anthropological Machine, Meat-Eating, Hegemonic Masculinity, and a Feminist Vegan Ethic. So please make sure you pay attention to that when you go do a nice reading of that. But I'm looking forward to hearing next from my colleague and my dear friend Linda, who has contributed to her wonderful article to this journal. And when you read the introduction, you'll probably note that we had to navigate some interesting spaces, and one of them was not knowing that one of our collective members had actually submitted to the journal. And kind of worked our way through that, and I'm so glad that we're able to hear about that now, because it's a terrific article. So Linda M. Kornbachus, of course, she has written an incredible piece called Repressing Righteous Rage. I love that title. The capitalist criminalization of animal advocacy. And so I believe Linda has a presentation, a short one to go with that. Take it away, Linda.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah May. What an introduction. Okay, hopefully this will work. Right, yes, I'm keeping this fairly short, mostly because I've spent the majority of the weekend finalising the journal. Yeah, this paper is really, it's more a commentary. There's nothing massively new in this, but what I tried to do, and it came from teaching criminology or crime and deviance as one of the topics in sociology in class. And what I tried to do was have a look at the criminalisation of campaigning for non-human animals. There are many of us doing it in one form or another, whether it's direct action or indirect campaigning. Either way, there has been in the past a real belief by authorities in certain places and at certain times that somehow this wish to emancipate our non-human brothers and sisters is problematic in some way. And that often what happens then is that we're considered, I say we, I mean, I'm not necessarily assuming everyone does this, but there's a consideration of it being deviant just meaning something that's out with the norm, of course. So once you decide that a practice, or once a society decides that a practice is deviant, and a lot of subcultural groups are labeled with this, the criminalisation starts, or at least that's the start of the process. In the case of animal liberation, activists, advocates. The word terrorist has been banded around quite a lot. And there's some really interesting documentaries that look at this link. It's ironic, really, because now wearing a mask is expected in everyday life as opposed to something that you do when you're trying to cover up your identity. What the paper really looks at is how some of what I would consider the real crimes in terms of animal, the industrial animal complex, essentially, are overlooked completely. The fact that animals can be mutilated, whether it's beaks or tails or testicles in some cases, without any anesthesia, and this being a practice that's perfectly acceptable within the different circles. In some cases, they're exempt from basic shelter because they don't fall under the same regulations and guidance as the other species of animal within. Sorry, I'm trying to do things at the same time. Within the scope of animal welfare regulation. And slaughter practices, often animal welfare rather than animal rights and liberation, is looking at just trying to make things a little less uncomfortable rather than to abolish the practices altogether. However, none of that stuff is considered unlawful. And this is where a kind of a hypocrisy of some sort comes in. So that's really what the paper is looking to highlight. And I do that by looking at some classical criminological theory, mostly critical theory, looking at how this kind of comes about. So I briefly addressed Stan Cohen's Folk Devils and Moral Panics study, which was way back now, but looking at how, in that case, it was the mods and the rockers in Brighton, and how one tiny skirmish that really wasn't very much at all turned into the demonization of youth culture at the time, particularly the subcultures of the mods and the rockers, and how the process by which that happened is very similar to the process by which animal rights activists have been equally criminalized. There's some Marxist ideology here in William Chambliss. Again, these are not new theories, these are classical ones, but it can be quite useful in order to understand how a lot of the critical criminology has developed since this time. And for Marxists, the whole problem is that crime is determined and defined by the state, and the state tends to be controlled or manipulated by the people in power, which the people with money, which are often the people that have a vested interest in these industries. I go on to cover another couple of classical criminological theories, but again, in the interest of time, I'll skip over those for now, but needless to say that they're in the paper. What I also highlight is that although there's animal welfare regulation across the world, the UK, for example, claims to have some of the best on the globe. So between the Animal Welfare Act of 2006, which is getting on a little bit now, there's currently an action plan for animal welfare, which includes the formulation of an animal sentience committee. Now, there was big news made at the time that this was announced, because suddenly we're accepting the fact that animals are sentient beings and capable of feeling pain and fear and whatnot. However, some non-human animals, particularly those that are killed to be eaten, are excluded from much of the consideration of the welfare and policy making agenda. So even though there would be an acceptance of cows and pigs and chickens and fishes as sentient to a lesser or greater degree by most people, the bill looks to really highlight, and I've given a quote there from it, what further welfare at slaughter improvements should be made. So really, it indicates particularly well that there's absolutely no way that animals are going to be, or non-humans in those kinds of circumstances, are going to be considered sentient enough to warrant this, stopping this kind of practice in the first place. So I hope I'm making some sense there. What's particularly interesting is when it gets down to people who are trying to stop this, whichever way they do so, whether it's by, like I say, direct action or not, or otherwise, this idea that somehow the people that are looking to free these animals from the situation that they're in are terrorists, it's important to look at how terrorism is defined. And actually it's changed over time, and it's changed often from a political perspective rather than really something quite fundamentally legal. So the definition before from the FBI here, terrorism is defined as the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property in furtherance of political or social objectives. Now, personhood is a whole other topic that we could spend, no doubt, hours discussing. But so even if someone doesn't believe that animals or non-human animals can be considered as persons, they surely acknowledge the fact that they could be considered property. And often that's the case. It's destruction of property and all these kinds of things that are leveled against activists when they, and I'm using inverted commas, steal property, and what they're really doing is rescuing non-humans who are suffering. Why then, though, are they not protected? If the bricks and mortar are being protected, why aren't the animals as property within that bricks and mortar protected? And the answer, unsurprisingly, comes down to money. Capitalism's already been mentioned today, and really that's where the power lies. And in criminalising campaigners, it's really for the benefit of the capitalists who make profit and make lots of it on the back of the suffering of our non-human kin. I'm going to be quiet there. The paper is available on the journal, of course, to read. It's not overly ranty. I've tried to make it academic enough to be considered acceptable. But really, until all are free, none of us are. And it doesn't really matter whether we're talking bricks and mortar, whether we're talking about increasing welfare arrangements, giving chickens slightly more cage room, as long as they're still caged, we still have a problem. So as liberatory vegans, it's our duty, I think, to be speaking on behalf of them, and this journal is part of that contribution to achieving that in the future. So thank you very much for listening. That's my Twitter handle. I'm getting the hang of Twitter these days, and of course we'll have questions at the end. I'll be happy to answer. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your attention to Linda. I mean, what an important topic. A lot of us feel this and live this every day. The idea, of feeling some kind of uncomfortable kind of stance within our own ethics, which is very hard to deal with when you come to realize, as sure many of us have, that what you really feel and believe as the way forward is challenged everywhere you go by very powerful institutions, people, and even just the way that the indoctrination of generations before us, and unfortunately some does an incredible job in her paper of capturing the rage that we all feel. So thank you. I think we're going to move next to another live presentation by the wonderful Cosette Patterson. Her work is incredibly useful when we're thinking about the different ways that we can towards a vegan ontology, little baby steps in all different ways. It's really informative, and it's a great way to present it. So this paper is called Humans and Non-Humans, Coexistence, Continuum, and Approaches for Working Towards Shared Sentience. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Cosette.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So I want to start by saying how grateful I am to be part of the first volume of this journal. My thanks extend to Linda and everyone at the Student Journal of Vegan Sociology, and especially Jennifer Schauer. Her class, Human Wildlife Conflicts to Coexistence, inspired me to write this paper, which began kind of as a synthesis of the beautiful literature we were reading. And kind of our crucial conversations on things ranging from social constructionism to the need for an emphasis on research on coexistence over conflict. And it became a larger project that eventually led to its publication in this journal. So I'm so honored to be here among people who are driven by empathy for non-human animals. So just kind of moving on to my paper, I am examining a continuum that kind of focuses on solutions toward coexistence. And I was inspired by the conflict to coexistence continuum created by Beatrice Frank, but I decided to focus solely on coexistence. So it begins at tolerance, and then it has notches on the continuum that kind of outline approaches towards the ultimate goal, which is the far right of the continuum, which is extreme coexistence. And I define that as shared sentience, which was a term that was introduced to me by Jennifer Shower's work. And I kind of define it in the paper as the ultimate crucial goal of human-animal interactions, a bond that unites the two in reverence, respect, and recognition of the other's very spirit. So kind of like going through the continuum, direct or different approaches to coexistence are laid out, differing in effectiveness. And then within each approach lies a variation to the solution, making it stronger or weaker. So this is the continuum that I created for this paper. So it begins with tolerance, but as we move through, it defines different approaches toward coexistence, starting with behavioral shifts. And a weaker variation of this is kind of shifting the behavior of animals through non-lethal management, such as deterrence, repellents, barriers, and sterilization programs. But a stronger variation of this, I thought, was shifting the behavior of humans, kind of understanding our own responsibility and mitigating conflict, evaluating language we use to discuss our interactions, and understanding the difference between perceived and real risks in interactions. And those are just a few of the examples I list in the sake of time. But moving on, the next approach to working toward extreme coexistence is the economies of life and death, which was another term brought to my attention by Jennifer Shower. And so a weaker variation of this is ecotourism alone, which may mean assigning a monetary value to life, but it's a way to reject economies of death, such as hunting and fishing. And then a stronger variation of this is ecotourism that includes education and outreach. So tourists have experiences and newfound knowledge that stick with them and make them more likely to become involved with conservation efforts. And then the final and ultimate goal is the recognition of sentience through human and non-human animal interactions. So I thought of a weaker form of this was interactions through photography or other media, which may be more accessible, and it's beneficial as tools for education and to raise awareness, but it can be limited by social perceptions. And then a stronger variation of this is just organic interactions without barriers. So experiencing space and time with a non-human animal, recognizing their importance in history, tradition, and culture, not just for the sake of humanity, such as wanting to be amongst nature for aesthetic or recreational purposes, but also for animals' own intrinsic value and the importance of their life. So that is kind of the run through of my continuum. And I kind of wanted to just read an excerpt from my paper. I just want to touch on my conclusion because I think it kind of gets to the heart of this paper and kind of answers what's the point of my continuum and what I was talking about with these different approaches. So this is my conclusion, complete coexistence through shared sentience. So along the veins of social constructs is also the human tendency to dichotomize, to comprehend through viewing things in life as night and day, and not recognizing the complexity of life for fear of its complications. However, it is damaging to view human-wildlife interactions through this lens. Non-human animals and nature are rarely so straightforward, and that is part of what makes them so beautiful and as sentient as we are. Therefore, we should strive to view interactions as on a continuum, which can be multidimensional, varying on a continuum from positive to negative, in intensity from minor to severe, and in frequency from rare to common, which is from the NIAS paper that I did. Within the added dimension of shared sentience, by putting interactions on a continuum, we can see that there is an entire spectrum and range of characterizing interactions. More specifically, we can pinpoint which interactions will lead us toward coexistence. As was mentioned in the NIAS article, humans cannot place blame solely on the non-human animals or force them to behave differently. So much of it has to do with humans' behaviors, taking responsibility for them, and striking a balance between the behaviors of non-human animals and humans in order to give way to connection. This brings to mind the summational effect in music, in which notes played together reverberate to form a chord, and can often begin to form an amplified third pitch just by resounding together. During an interaction, humans and wild animals may be coming together from very different experiences, but a third, almost spiritual and entirely holistic way of knowing is created, a shared sentience. This is something upon which we can place no monetary value, for it is so rich in empathy, compassion, and a power of connection living beyond language. Throughout my life, I've seen various moments of these summational effects in human-wildlife interactions, and I will end with this one. My experience of finding a small champagne-colored bird, a brown creeper, trapped in a roadside shop in Vermont. I could see his little chest heaving with deep breaths of panic and overworking himself to get out, startled by all the foot traffic in the shop. Although my travel companions and I did everything we could to get him out, he kept flitting from wall to wall with such an incessant, frantic stress that we thought it best not to force the situation. We left a note, propped the doors open, and began heading back to the car. However, I hesitated, pivoted on my heels, and desperately looked back once more, tempted to try to move to help to get the bird out. However, as the bird perched on the shelf of the shop, his soulful eyes meeting my gaze, I felt a sense of profound calm wash over me. It was a moment of connection that allowed me to understand he'd make it out of there eventually, his steadying breath soothing my worries. This is Shower's shared sentience, an interaction and instant of communication that goes beyond the physical and pushes into the psyche and spirit, striking a chord of empathy that leaves each being with the potent force of understanding one another. Thank you so much. I am so grateful to be part of this, and I can't wait to hear from the other speakers. And it's been so wonderful to hear from everyone before me. So thank you.
Thank you, Cosette, for recording that super useful presentation. As soon as she started speaking about the economies of life and death, I think that's a really useful way to frame how a lot of interactions occur with humans and non-humans, and it really brings it to really right into the forefront, very clear about how we could really shift that, and of course why we need to. Our final, the final paper in the journal, which is an interesting piece in itself because it is a work by a professor and his students, and I think that that's something that really embodies what we've been doing here in the journal, where we're working with our faculty guides, our mentors, learning from each other, and working together towards a common goal. And I think this is a really educational piece just in itself, because thinking about nutritional sciences and thinking for a little about Canadian food guide and how that has shifted over time, and how that might be translating into the education and the individuals who are embarking on that kind of career right now. I think it's important to pay attention to that, and this is a fantastic example of that. So without further ado, we have Jake Salloway Costello, Maisie Corbett, Abigail Larkin, Andrew Mellard, Lily Murray, and Catherine Sellens. And these individuals have put together this paper called Vegan Faces in Anthroparchal Spaces, Student Reflections on Educational Experiences of Veganism in Nutritional Sciences. So thank you for your attention.
On educational experiences of veganism in nutritional sciences. I'm Jake Salloway Costello. I'm an assistant professor in public health nutrition at the University of Nottingham, and this paper is co-authored with students on BSc Nutrition and EdNutri Nutrition and Dietetics, Maisie Corbett, Abigail Larkin, Andrew Mellard, Lily Murray and Katie Sellens. To give some background to our paper, it predominantly concerns the experiences of being vegan in, as we say, non-vegan spaces, studies and disciplines which predominantly attract criticism from anthropological sources. And so we start off with this idea that veganism is, of course, increasing in popularity, particularly amongst younger people, and this is having a huge effect on student populations. Students now at modern universities are more likely to be vegan than ever before. In their paper and their book on this matter, Cole and Stewart identified that there are anthropological mannerisms in the school system in the UK, and they identify this primarily through the formal and the hidden curriculum. So the idea that schools promote anthropological violence and values using explicit teaching methods, but also concerning the culture of the school system, and they give really pertinent examples in their book that speak to this matter. And I suppose what we were really interested in is, are these ideas that Cole and Stewart put forward about the school system replicated in the university system? And as vegan students and as a vegan lecturer, we were particularly interested in the role that anthropology plays in nutrition education, and particularly how this affects students and the vegan student experience when studying food science, nutrition and dietetics. This was not a research paper. This was not with students as participants, but rather students as co-authors contributing to the paper directly. 5 vegan students on undergraduate degrees, on professionally accredited degrees in nutrition and dietetics, came forward to reflect on their experiences of being vegan students in inherently non-vegan disciplines. The professional accrediting bodies, the British Dietetic Association and the Association for Nutrition, explicitly require the teaching of non-vegan educational outcomes, and so this is quite interesting from us as vegan sociologists to consider the perspective that people are being forced to learn things which are, of course, naturally conflicting with their views. Students were invited. I invited 5 students that I knew from my lectures to be vegan, invited them to be part of the writing process, which we thought could be quite an unusual experience in terms of vegan authorship, but also the scholarship of writing for a peer-reviewed publication, and what a great opportunity to do so for this new student journal. Students were provided with some prompts, literally just some questions about their experience of being vegan before, after and during university, and of how their student experience had been affected throughout that longevity. And of course, as these are current students, they were not asked what was your experience after university, but rather reflect on what you anticipate coming out of the end experience of your studies. We then created an organised synthesis from this, so we collaborated ideas into a reflective paper that explored some key themes throughout our ideas of what it meant to be a vegan student. And although I'm now a vegan lecturer, I of course was a vegan university student myself some time ago, so we worked on this paper together, and it was very much a team effort right from the original writing through to synthesis, through to peer review, to final edits and scrutiny. I won't read out all of these quotes because I would like you to enjoy them for yourself when you're reading through our paper, but reflecting on student experiences of being vegan before university, something that students picked up on quite a lot was that many students came to this process of being vegan not necessarily through animal rights, but rather through the health impacts of veganism and the plant-based diet. And there was a bit of mention here about familial representation of veganism, that they have family members or friends or relatives that thought they were going to die of the plant-based diet, and the students were almost determined to prove them wrong. This led into self-led research into dietary health, which ultimately led them into studying nutrition and dietetics. Some students also reflected on what they anticipated happening when they got to university, and this student here gives us some reflection of being resigned to the fact that they might be asked to engage in non-vegan activities, learn non-vegan ideas, and also engage in sensory experiences of non-vegan food. And whilst being interviewed for the dietetics degree, they specifically intentionally avoided saying the word vegan for fear that they might not get a place on the course for that reason, which I think really speaks to this idea that before university, vegan students are both motivated by their veganism, but also it creates barriers in terms of their anticipated student experience and enjoying the course. When we think about the experience of being a vegan on a non-vegan degree, we've separated our thoughts here and our reflections into what Colin Stewart identified as the formal curriculum and the hidden curriculum. The formal curriculum being the series of explicit learning outcomes, and the hidden curriculum referring more to the culture of education. And students reflected here in this formal curriculum section mostly about a particular module in their early degree on agri-food systems, in which they were explicitly taught very clearly biased perspectives on the food system, which advocated against vegan diets, which were thought to be unsustainable. There was clearly a bit of a lack of evidence base in some of these lectures, and actually 3 different students reflected on a particular lecture which was given by a guest speaker from a dairy farm, who told them that meat-free Mondays was a completely pointless exercise, and that in order to attain health, people have to eat meat on a regular basis. What came through really strongly in our reflections is that when the lectures were given by unbiased lecturers who were predominantly interested in intellectual curiosity and diverse ideas, the lectures were promoting of veganism. The lectures became problematic when they were delivered by people that had industrial connections or some bias in their background. In terms of the hidden curriculum, students then started to reflect on actually university for the most part being a very supportive experience, and the campus experience itself being one of general support. This particular student reflects on how they sometimes keep to themselves about being vegan because they don't want to get grief from other nutrition students or dietetic students. They also share the campus with agricultural students and farmers in training, so sometimes there is an incentive to keep quiet. But other students reflected on how very supportive the community has been, not just students but also the nutrition staff. And again, like I said earlier, how the intellectual curiosity of academics, in many cases, if there is a strong evidence base, leads them to be really supportive of plant-based diets and general vegan principles. Students also reflected briefly on what they thought their lives might be like after they've studied nutritional dietetics at university. And this student here, in a short time since I started my degree in nutrition, she says that she's taken a 180, deciding that she is going to completely incorporate affiliations with veganism into her professional work in the future, and she looks forward to a future of being a nutritionist or a dietitian who promotes veganism as an evidence-based diet. And another student thinks about the role of raising children as vegan and how very little information there is out there. So she wants to use her experiences of university, the science underlying veganism, to promote the diet towards people and children that are being raised that way. There was a real sense of hope in some of these student reflections, and it was great to see that students are making sense of their experience of university to go on to create liberating futures for themselves and their clients in practice. I suppose, therefore, as a bit of a conclusion, we kind of started to see nutrition and its teaching in modern universities in the UK as a science of vegan potential. This is a science which, if taught well from an evidence base, really promotes veganism, and the student experience associated with it could be entirely positive if that evidence base is promoted successfully. Something we identified is that veganism is taught in this complex educational micropolitics, and like I say, this largely conflicted with courses which also teach things like agriculture, animal science, and maybe some of the more microbiological aspects of nutrition. There were student reflections which reflected on pathologization of the vegan diet, that it was a problem to be dealt with, and that veganism was some way inherently exceptional, that it was a problem, and that, say, vegan unsustainability of particular vegan products was a reflection of the whole diet, which was taught in comparison to non-exceptional purposes of, say, the standard Western pattern diet. There were some tensions and conflicts that arose, but as I say, these largely came from outer industry actors that were coming in to teach things about their own industry, and were not doing so largely from an evidence base. And something that students reflected on was that the healthy community of support that they received during their studies as a nutritional dietetic student gave them a good sense that there is potential for this future of vegan liberation and nutrition to serve as a vegan science. We hope that you find something interesting in our paper, Vegan Faces in Anthroparchal Spaces, Student Reflections on Educational Experiences of Veganism in Nutritional Sciences, and we thank the International Association for Vegan Sociologists for their opportunity to write for this fantastic journal, and we thank the editorial team for all their hard work.
That was a wonderful talk. Thank you everyone for sticking around and listening to that. We have we've gone over time by a couple of minutes, not surprising with how much we have to say. Been scrolling through the chat and I see so many incredible conversations going on, really important discourse and back and forth. And it makes me happy to see that we're inspiring just by sitting and listening this together. Our ideas are coming out and we're talking about it. This is what needs to happen all the time. And so I can't really express how proud I'm feeling right now. Thank you everyone for being here. And what do you think, Linda? Are we going to push our time and go forward? Are we going to take it elsewhere? What are your thoughts?
Nah, we're a bunch of anarchists. Let's continue as we
I thought you might
go
say
on.
that.
That's been absolutely brilliant. And again, we didn't get a chance to listen to all the pre-recorded stuff before we've played it today. So I can't speak highly enough of this team, of the students, for not just the submissions, but the time and the care they spent in addressing revisions that we had for them and accepting them, and for the most part people commenting that it made their paper better to have had somebody else peer review it. And I certainly know that was the case with mine, even though nobody knew it was mine at the time. So I really do, I'm really proud of everyone and everyone's contribution to this, and to the IAVS really for allowing it to happen, as well as Jennifer steering the ship. So I shall, what I want to do, because I know that people have other priorities, I just want to call, we've got a couple of pieces of information we want to share, and then we'll move to question and answers for anyone that wants to hang around and do that. And I'm certainly happy to stay if others are, to address the amazing chat that's going on. So before I do that though, and thank you all for being here. It's been great. At one point we've gone over 30 people in the launch event, which is magnificent. We want to send out a call for translators, if this is actually going to do this properly. What we are looking to do, and again, it's to encourage other people to be involved in the conversation. It's to make this a little bit more accessible to as many people as possible. We're not talking necessarily about translating the entire journal, because that would obviously be quite a task for a volunteer. But what we are asking for is anyone who speaks languages other than Romanian, French, Spanish, and German to please get in touch with us. And the email is there, editor@vegansociology.com, if you're able to translate into any other language that exists on the planet. What we'd like to do is just have the abstracts available in different languages that will allow people to access the information and understand that stuff is there, and know that they can come look for it, because I think the English speaking world has always been the focus of much of academia, and a lot of places, as Jennifer alluded to earlier on, are overlooked. So that's a call for help. And if you can do this or know someone who can, please get in touch with us about that. And the final thing before we open the floor for questions is the call for papers for our second volume, which we are officially launching today. So we have a 2-month window here in which we hope that if you're a professor or lecturer, that you might want to share the information with students that you have that perhaps you know would be interested in submitting. We have some guidelines that we hope that people will follow, and those are available on the website, and the web address is there. But we're thinking there's going to be a lot of end of term papers coming up, perhaps, or papers that students finished up before summer. It can be undergraduate, it can be postgraduate, as long as I think the only stipulation is that you haven't earned your PhD yet, and your papers will be very, very welcome. We hope to start the process. Well, it's been a long journey, but one of a lot of lessons for us, and it's one of the reasons that we've pulled the deadline forward a little, and also because the little hoglet that features on the front and back covers of the journal in Scotland, the 31st of December, which is New Year's Eve, is referred to as Hogmanay. So I kind of thought that went quite well. We'll start the reading process in January and start to hone down the selected papers for peer review thereafter. So please don't be afraid to submit something. It might not be perfect. None of them are when they first come in. Even the most experienced professors will tell you that their work is peer reviewed, and usually there are revisions regardless of how experienced they are. So use that as an opportunity, as many of the students in this volume did and have felt better for. So all that remains then is to open up, to thank everyone for attending today. Very, very grateful for your presence in space. To thank everyone. There are acknowledgements in the journal itself in the last couple of pages, but really to say that this seemed like a long way away, and now it's today and it's here. Maria messaged me earlier like, oh my goodness, it's actually today, and it's great. It seems like now it's just all fell into place when it needed to, so it's been wonderful. Thank you very much indeed for everyone for your attention. I'll continue to record for the question and answer session, and if anyone is uncomfortable with that, if you can let me know, I can pause the recording for the time that you're asking your question and getting your answer. Thank you very much indeed. Happy World Vegan Day. And yeah, if anyone has any general questions for the faculty, for the editorial team, some of whom are here, or for the authors, some of whom remain here, please feel free to, maybe because there's quite a lot going on, it might be worth if you can put your hand up to let us know that you have a question. Otherwise, what I'll do is we'll go through the questions in the chat. So I'll let somebody speak first of all while I go through those. Thank you very, very much indeed.
I see Lindsay Kramer has her hand
yes,
up. If we want to, yes.
Hi, Lindsay, welcome. And what's your question?
Oh yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for your presentations. They're excellent. This is going to make me sound really ignorant, actually, and it's just a general question, and I need to find out, because I'm a bit worried about bees and the fact that they're dying out, and you know that the whole kind of question around whether we should eat honey or not. I want somebody's view. I want somebody to sort of give me some kind of sort of support and understanding as to what we can do to promote bees and keep them without actually, I guess, farming them in a way and using them as a product, which probably isn't great. But anyway, just somebody give me some info. Somebody that knows a bit more.
I'm certainly happy to address the kind of basic vegan ethic behind that, which is that what bees produce is theirs and not ours, and to take it is effectively theft of something that we don't need and don't produce ourselves. So in terms of support for whether or not honey is vegan, I think that's a straightforward answer in accordance with the ethics of veganism. In terms of beekeeping, which I think you're specifically asking about as well, I'm not so sure where the ethical stands. Like I think farming them is going to be particularly against what we would stand for. But if you're trying to provide a place for them to be, with one E, then I can't see that being any different from making sure your garden is full of wildflowers. I guess it's the interference with them afterwards that would create the difficulty. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add to that.
I'll just add that I think it's useful to know that it's very common for bees to be collected and utilized as tools by farmers. And if you start to think about not just interference by perhaps being a beekeeper, but interference by utilizing them, by shuttling them across the country from one farm to another, one area to another for human purposes. I mean, their agency is completely lost in that. It's one thing to consider perhaps providing a home for bees in your own space. Some people will construct, actually my partner constructed a bee house, which is simply just a structure that certain types of bees in our area are drawn to give them a space that would be safe, that to an opportunity not to put them there, but to invite them there. Because we do recognize that not having the bees in our reality would be catastrophic. They're pollinators in general are incredibly important, not just for themselves, for their own lives, but if we broaden it out, we can see by just that example of shipping bees across the country to try to pollinate human crops, that it is recognized in industry and institutions that this is that a lot of what we do rests on their well-being, in big quotes. And so I think there's probably someone here who is much more of an arthropod expert, but I think that just even considering how you can interface with them, coexist with them, as wonderful Jennifer and our other and Cosette mentioned, in your own little space, that is a good place. So I like to start with all beings if I can. So perhaps that helps a little bit.
I hope that answers your question, Lindsay, to some degree. I want to just address some of the great questions in the chat. There's a lot of question and answer going back and forward, so maybe some people have answered already, but very early on, Emily, who I think is no longer here, but again, may watch this back, so it's an important question. She says, hello everyone, in some of my sociology courses, we've discussed how vegan scholars and sociologists use the term companion animal rather than pet, and that shifts the language and stops the perpetuation of animal status as objects or possessions. What are other ways we can adapt our language or actions in our daily lives to encourage the switch to a more posthumistic perspective? Which is a great question, and one that we're all attempting to answer. Because we had a discussion in a meeting, an editorial meeting not a few days ago with Jennifer about the use of language, and one of the reasons that we were very clear to replace the word animal with non-human animal in most of the papers when we were editing, to take out the use of the word meat, because although we use it and we all understand what that means, we shouldn't use it, because what it does is maintain this kind of separation from what it really is, which is obviously death and violence. So I don't know, Jennifer, if you want to say a little about that, because I know that it's something that you're very keen to promote in terms of our use of language.
Yeah, sure. I think this journal is such a beautiful space for the production, maybe the co-creation of language in a new order, like the new emancipatory ideals that we are moving towards, that we are starting in this journal to kind of encase that into how we write. So while all of the words meat were not removed because we kept some within context, we wanted individuals, the readership, to start feeling as though we are attempting to address the exploitive and violent and atrocities, really, of non-human animals. And that has been removed by using pork, for example, instead of the word pig, sausage instead of, what is in the sausage, sometimes it's pig, sometimes it's various animals, and meat in general, meat eating culture. So, so there's that, and there's, the non-human animal species as opposed to animals. And that is attempting to say, well, they're non-human species and humans are a species too. We could say Homo sapiens if we wanted to be quite scientific, because that's what humans are, according to the ration and the consensus. But so there's a lot of ways we're starting to really shift into the new I keep saying order, but I know that we also say we're anarchists and abolitionists and rebels. And so, whatever, we do still have order and we still have systems. So we are recreating systems to be inclusive of non-human animals as much as possible. So I think I feel all of us are open to what that might look like. And this is just only the beginning of resituating language in a hegemonic system as a form of resistance towards emancipation of humans and non-humans. So I just, it's such a beautiful way, and I'm so excited that we were able to do that in this first journal, and it's just opening the space to what more can be situated in new meanings and understandings and spaces we live in. So yeah, thanks Emily and Linda. And while I have the floor, can I just say I'm so grateful for this wonderful collective of students. Linda and Sarah May, they are the co-pilots running this. I don't know, is it an airplane? Is it a ship? I don't know. It's a new world. And they are in charge of a lot of empowered women, but they're not really in charge because we don't really have a hierarchy. So, and it worked out beautiful. It was just a tapestry of emotion and logic and feminine qualities and masculine qualities, and all that came together in reconfiguring how we live with non-human species. So I could go on, Maria, Rochelle, Renelle, just so much gratitude to all of you, Jillian, all of you in the collective. I'm honored and privileged to be a part of this endeavor. So thank you. Thank you,
Jennifer. I think it feels more like a dinghy sometimes than a boat, I have to be honest with you, but we're doing okay. Get the water out. There's some, I get in the interest of time, I don't know that we'll be able to address absolutely everything. There's been some great discussion and a lot of people answering things. One question that's come up related to my paper was about how we would deconstruct the definitions of deviance. That's from Cooper, that prevent us from acting in opposition of violence in a culture where violence is taught to children from a young age. But I think that's part of the key, isn't it? It's about recreating. I mean, I'm a bit of a you know, most of us are a bit of a neo-Marxist to some degree in terms of wanting to, part of the problem is the capitalist system that creates the definitions of what deviance and crime are in the first place. And you can only be deviant in relation to the norm, so we need to change the norm. That's an easier thing to say than to do, perhaps. But I think the process has started. But yeah, the key is my own research, my doctoral research is about vegan children and how they experience life linked to what Jake and his students were talking about as well. And when we can start to deconstruct that a little bit for very young children, where the ideas start and this normalization is kind of ingrained, then I think we are starting on the road to changing things. And yeah, I know there's a few people talking about Foucauldian thought processes, and Foucault's perfect for this, as is Bourdieu, which I think somebody else has mentioned. So yeah, wonderful stuff. I think there are only another couple of questions. There's some great comments. What I'll try and do is save the chat so that we don't miss anything. There's a lot of thanks to all the speakers, which is great. And then there's a question, again, another question from Lindsay here. Why there's been a shift in the number of people who are vegans. And it's kind of interesting, here we're talking about Gramsci and other, you know, if you can distract people from each other's difficulties, then, you know, you can get away with murder while they're not looking literally murder. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting discussion. I think though it's probably wise to distinguish between who would consider themselves vegans and who are essentially just following a plant-based diet without the associated ethic. So I think maybe trying to get plant-based people to appreciate the ethics behind the choices that are available to them now actually would be a good point there. Oh, there's loads and loads here, lots about Weber and everything. Yeah, some social psychologists in the room too, which is wonderful. That's one of my degrees. Love that stuff. And there's some comment here as well about intersectionality and how this all links together, which is something that I think comes across in some of the papers very well. You can't talk about the liberation of animals without also talking about the liberation of oppressed peoples as well, or humans, I should say. I think that's the end of, unless I'm missing anything, Sarah May, I'm not sure if you can see.
I haven't found a I'm glad you covered the question that was asked really early on. I think a lot of the conversations are back and forth. So I'm hoping we can save them. Like you said, download them, because there's some really great stuff in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, and in case anyone who is still with us has a question they haven't put in the chat,
yeah,
we can address that now.
Matthew's off to make Kate's dinner. I love that.
Yeah, everyone's got, I know everyone's so busy.
It's that kind of time. My husband's just brought me my dinner, which is now sitting on the printed out copy of the journal and making it all yucky. So anyway.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions that anyone has, or any comments or anything at all?
I want to just say thank you, Linda, and thank you, Sarah May. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, all the students, for making this happen, because I feel like this is something we really can be proud of. And I'm just astonished by the quality of it. And I understand being on the editorial kind of advisory board, whatever, not having done any of the work myself, but just watching all the work that you were doing, and the volume of organization that took place via email and on Microsoft Teams. And I'm just floored by that. And it's really, really something to be proud of. The quality of the submissions as well. Zoe and I have been chatting behind the scenes, and we're just stunned by it. So congratulations to everybody. Really something to be proud of. Even the cover art is gorgeous.
Oh, we have to say something about the cover art.
Yeah.
Maria, your peer, your friend, an artist. I think I'm so glad we landed on that one. Of course, everything was a process, but it's so beautiful. I think it encompasses so much. It's very attention grabbing. It does all the things a cover should do, and it's just gorgeous. So,
indeed. Wonderful. What he's just mentioned there, just probably worth saying that the Animal Rights Show tonight is also focused on veganism. I think it starts about 6 o'clock on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. So it's worth saying that too. Also, the Sociology Show podcast features yours truly from today as well. I think that's already online. So there's lots happening. And
Katie Oliver has a book talk coming out.
Oh, she does on Wednesday.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's loads happening. Please keep an eye on in fact, I think I had a last slide that I failed to share, which is asking everyone to get more involved, to tell other people, let's see, there we are. Let us know what you think of the articles. We'll certainly pass that on to the authors, and consider getting involved with the student collective in terms of editorial. There's always lots to be done in the move to try and veganize the world. So whether it's the editorial collective or whether you want to just be more involved with the association for vegan sociologists, then there's lots of opportunity. The website is there, the email address for the journal is there, and I hope that you'll share that far and wide and let people who might be interested in joining maybe we should say train rather than ship. I don't know, it doesn't really matter.
I like the word dinghy. I like dinghy, makes me smile.
Let's go dinghy, all right.
Let's stay with dinghy.
Okay, so if you want to join, try and fit in our dinghy, then it's a big dinghy, plenty of room for everyone. And like I say, I just can't thank everybody enough for turning up and for being involved in it. Yes, Maria has just put in the chat the Just Wondering collective link. I mean, that's an amazing project as well that Maria's involved in. And there's just some amazing video essays in there. It's quite new to me, that whole concept, and it's just phenomenal. And Mina is one of the artists involved in that project. So yeah, we definitely need to say, I'll save this chat when the call is over, and we'll pull out the interesting information and the contacts and things, and share that with everyone who booked on. So any other questions or comments before we go?
That's incredible. Sorry, Linda, I was just going to say that this is being recorded, as we mentioned at the beginning, so you'll be able to watch it again or share it soon. So
we will have a link on the journal page somewhere to that. I imagine it might go on the IAVS YouTube channel once I get it organized. So I think I'll wrap up then. I have to say thank you very, very much to everyone. I'm not going to list everyone again. They're listed in the journal. Please read the journal. And please send it around places and copy it and copy the links and from Twitter, from Facebook and everything else. The more people that can read it and refer to it, the better. And vegan sociology is definitely a thing now, which is wonderful. So thank you everyone for your time, and over and out.
Bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye. I'll stop recording.